Good afternoon, dear listener. Welcome to this third episode of Conversations on Tax and Taxation. Today, in the conversation is Maureen Baraza from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya. She's a program officer in the Popular Economics program. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you.
Yes, so today we are talking about economic planning, reflecting on the politics of the past and pestilence, which this conversation will draw a lot on a report done by the Institute of Economic Affairs, which was titled very nicely, and then the floods. But I want us to really try and simplify economics, economic policy, and their relationship to tax and taxation. So, Maureen, what's economic policy?
I will say economic policy are basically the actions of the government that sort of influence the economy. And it's divided into three broad areas. You have the fiscal policy that majorly covers the taxation and government spending. Then we have the monetary policy that basically covers the interest rates and also the exchange rates. Then we have trade policy, which looks into tariffs and trade agreements. So it's okay. It's made by it's the action for economic policy is carried by the legislature arm of the government and the economic advisors who influence the economic policy environment.
Yeah, okay, man, that's quite interesting because we're interested here in questions of tax and taxation. So, who makes economic policy, especially the fiscal policy, and how do they do it?
The fiscal policy, like we've mentioned before, is majorly taxation and spending. This is from the different ministries which present their proposals to Parliament for the Parliament to approve in the form of in form of a finance bill, whereby they present different proposals across different ministries on how they're going to raise money to finance their different budgets for the year. So it's a whole process all the way to Parliament, which majorly passes the finance bill.
Okay, I mean, we'll come back to the finance bill because you know very well we've had two major issues, the finance bill 2023, finance bill 2024.
Okay.
But I want to take you back to why is economic policy important? Why should we be bothered about economic policy? Or should we just leave it to the economists and government officers?
I will say we need to be bothered first because of course, if it's a positive economic policy, it influences the major economy, employment, public debt, and all those issues. But if it's negative, of course, it will improve factors such as unemployment, the cost of living, that is basically prices in food and non-food components in the economy. It's like an outpouring effect on the economy, basically, by implementing bad economic policy. When it's good, for instance, in developed countries, most of them implement good economic policies all the way from their taxation, uh, the pricing. It affects different things, even in terms of delivery of public services, because whatever is raised in revenue is used in expenditure. And also, there's also the issue of grants, the conditional grants, which are used in expenditure for public services. So, if revenue is misused, or maybe the policies that are placed there, people will lack education, kids will lack education, there won't be healthcare. Um, Factors such as infrastructure will be affected. So that's why economic policy is really important and everyone should be concerned about it.
If the government is bothered about the welfare, the government's biggest responsibility is the welfare of its citizens. And you've used the term good economic policy. Do you mean there are bad economic policies? And how would that happen?
Yes, of course, there are good and bad economic policies. I'll give an example of a bad economic policy to just illustrate this case. Like, for instance, I'll use the word fiscal consolidation. By fiscal consolidation, it's just the taxes that the government implements. And by implementing these taxes, for instance, the recent finance bill, people were debating on different taxes that the government is trying to implement. If they raise taxes on something as simple as bread, it's affecting so many people, all the way from farmers to consumers to the last person who's consuming the final product. So by implementing these policies, there's some people who will go hungry, businesses will have to be closed down, and also the government in itself might not be able to collect that revenue that they were aiming to collect at the end of it all, because whatever they were aiming for, these businesses that have closed down, people have cut down on spending because people will try to use alternatives. They'll try to, if it's bread, people will try to eat maybe roast maize or whatever to maybe divert the money that they would have used on bread to spend it on healthcare, to spend it on education.
But if it's fiscal policies about taxation, tax and taxation, taxes are a key element of government revenue, which means that they actually are then reinvested in the society. So how do you say it's a bad economic policy when at the end of the day, it's meant to increase government revenue, which then would be spent on programs that should uplift the lives of the citizens? And I'm asking this in relation to, we'll go back to the 2023 finance bill and 2024 finance bill. Yes.
I'm not saying tax in itself in entirety, it's a bad policy, but if you've heard of the Laffer curve, in economics, you have something known as the Laffer curve, where you can only tax people to a certain level.
That's natural, yes.
Yes. So, like, for instance, the two previous finance bills that the government has been trying to implement, the financial year 23-24 and 24-25,
yes,
there were some taxes that were imposed that the government was trying to impose. For instance, the taxes on motorcycles, the bread, the sanitary towels, among
taxes
other.
on private vehicles.
Yes,
pay
taxes on private vehicles.
Yes.
Okay, at some point it loses the purpose of being a tax. For instance, we have different tax heads, including something like excise tax,
Yes,
which is meant to act as it's known as a sin tax. It's meant to like reduce maybe bad behavior that people
consumption of
health, yes,
goods that are harmful to the health,
yes,
like cigarettes,
yes,
beer, for example, alcohol.
Yes. But the fact that you're implementing excise tax on even communication costs, airtime, internet, it loses the meaning of taxation in itself, of the tool that's being used. So by implementing overtaxing people, that's why I'm saying it's a bad policy, because of course there are consequences that come along with implementing these taxes, and also the sort of the response or the answer to public deficit, that is public debt that the government needs to settle, is not taxing people. Instead, the government should cut on its spending.
Okay.
That should be the answer. But as it is, they've increased expenditure, but they're trying to tax people more.
Okay, that then makes us go to the financial bill 2023, 2024, then 2024, 2025. What were the major flaws in these financial bills, and how do these ones relate back to economic policy? Because if these flaws were there, then there's something that there was an easy relationship between these attempts at raising revenue in relation to the existing economic policies.
Sorry, could you please rephrase the question?
What was the big problem with the Financial Bill 2023 and Financial Bill 2024 in relation to the declared government economic policies?
First of all, I'd like to go back to the point of imposing taxes that lose the meaning of
Or
trying to tax
justification,
people. Yeah, the justification,
Yeah.
like the excise tax, and also the fact that you need to implement or rather change or make amendments to the finance bill every year. I don't think it's a requirement that's stipulated in law.
Okay.
Yes, because if at all the previous finance bill has not been well implemented, I don't see the need to amend and add things that are more or less not necessarily needed, or rather overstepping with the taxation thing in implementing the tax. That's why I'm saying it's a bad tax policy that was being implemented for this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the stated economic policy, for example, let me give you an example, is that the government is going to fund devolution. Just for example, it's going to make available resources at the local level, county government, so that county governments can then push for localized development. That needs money, right? And if the government cannot raise money and it seeks to raise money locally so that it doesn't borrow locally, it doesn't borrow internationally, it will seek to implement certain taxation models, isn't it?
Yes.
So, what should the government do if it seeks to support, let's say, development at the local point, but then there's resistance from citizens against taxation?
Okay. As it is, when you're calculating public deficits, you take its revenue, the difference between revenue and expenditure.
Yes.
Yes. So when you're calculating that, you have to figure out where you're getting money to finance the public deficit.
Yes.
So it's normally from revenue, grants, or you have to borrow. So if people push back on the revenue, then the government, like I stated earlier, has to look for how they can either cut on spending or choose to borrow. Those are the only options.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that because you did say that the government actually needs to limit its consumption, that's what it's spending, and tie it or try to balance it with what it can raise in terms of revenue, isn't it? Which then brings us to a question that Kenyans have been grappling with, but Kenyans don't talk enough about it. Why do external agencies like the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, etc., influence local national economic policies? Why?
Okay. External agencies like the IMF. Okay, I'll talk about the IMF because that's what we've sort of tried to look into in this paper. The IMF, when Kenya went to the IMF, it was like the lender of last resort because it had tried borrowing from the Exim Bank, World Bank, all those. There's a trail of public debt from all these other debtors. Then the IMF was like the lender of last resort. And what does the lender of last resort come with? they came with their own conditionalities on what needs to be implemented. Just the same way, when the government procured a loan from the Chinese for the standard gauge railway, there were different conditionalities attached to it, of which the government didn't produce documents publicly, but you can feel there's something going on for them to repay back. And also, for the IMF, they came with their own conditionalities. In a report dated April 2021, when the program started, the 38-month program started. That was in April 2021. It's ending next year in April 2025. Um, there were conditionalities attached to it, of which whoever sat in the committee to create the conditionalities, we had the internal team from Kenya and also the IMF. So the IMF states that the internal team that involves people from the Treasury and the World Bank and the economic advisors who sat down to craft this together with the IMF, said the conditions were homegrown. So they were basing it on whatever they were being told by the team from Kenya to create these conditionalities. So in the process, they created conditionalities. The choice was between cutting on spending and also, fiscal consolidation. So they chose to go the fiscal consolidation way, which was to raise taxes. And at some point, if you had, there were calls to raise like uniform taxes such as VAT, because everyone will be able to pay that, but there was pushback. So they're trying to exhaust every avenue to make sure they raise taxes in all manner of ways, including the housing levy, all that, to make sure the government raises its revenue. So that's how these external agencies sort of try to I don't know the exact word to use here, but they're trying to encroach into the sovereignty of the country, which is not supposed to be the case. The legislature is supposed to push back on this, but they're not doing it because everyone is, including the MPs themselves, they're saying we need to pay these taxes. Even when the finance bill was sort of withdrawn, they were saying, I'll quote it in Swahili. Si mlikataa finance bill, hakuna development, hakuna maendeleo, such a thing. Because in their minds, it's the finance bill raising revenue was the one that will facilitate payment of money for development. Now they've resorted to privatization, trying to sell state-owned enterprises, including the airports. There's also the KPLC deal going with Adani. So they're trying to explore other routes apart from revenue and borrowing to repay external debts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking this because previously we had what were called structural adjustment programs.
Mhm.
I guess they've just come back in another name, right?
Mhm.
They exist in another name. And the way you've spoken about here, you've talked about conditionalities.
Mhm.
So are you saying that because we are borrowing, if it's a lender, why would they insist on these conditionalities?
I'll say these conditionalities, if you go back to the report that was sort of done when the program was starting, they're stated there: the privatization, the taxes, the structural reforms. It was all stated in that report. It's just the implementation. The only newly introduced thing was the resilience. There's a clause on resilience which involves global warming, whereby CBAMs are supposed to be implemented. That's the only thing that was introduced recently. But these other conditionalities have always been there, and we are arguing: are they is it that they can't change? It's not like they're the 10 commandments that we have to do this, because we've had so many shocks since April 2021. We've had so many shocks as a country, and the IMF has not tried to like change. It's stuck on, you need to raise revenue, you need to privatize, you need to do this. And it's sort of crippling the macroeconomic environment.
Yeah, which then brings us to the questions. Can you just speak a little bit to the report here, which you have, and then floods, a critical macroeconomic assessment of IMF conditionality, and you've used the singular conditionality as opposed to conditionalities on Kenya 2021 to the present. I'm assuming to the present means 2024, right?
Yes.
So just speak to this report. What is it? What motivated this report? And what is it that is in the report?
Okay. Okay. I'll speak on the topic first and then floods. Yes, if you remember this year we had floods as a country, and it was like a vulnerable moment for Kenya because we were more or less unprepared for the issue on floods.
Just like we are always unprepared.
Yeah,
Floods.
okay, yeah, that's the case. So we were just looking at yes, since the report was implemented until this year, a lot has happened. And we're looking at the resilience of this program, the 38th month program that the IMF started implementing in April 2021. And this, I'll just give sort of a summary to the report. And we agree that it was born when there was a deep growth shortfalls, that's the GDP. Then we have a heavily overvalued exchange rate. Then we have an excessively loose fiscal stance. That's the fiscal space that Kenya had. And also an elevated public debt stock. And these prospects were threatened by rising global interest rates. We have some charts that show that. And there are also large bullet payments. That was the Eurobond that was due.
What do you mean by bullet payment?
Bullet payments.
Repayment?
Yes, of external public debt. That's the Eurobond. And then we had droughts. And we were looking at what the IMF did in the implementation of this program. Yes, we had a backloaded fiscal adjustment. That's the revenue space that was recommended. Then we had the taxation and all these conditionalities. And we looked at it in terms of 10 antecedents. And these 10 antecedents, we looked at what's like a 30-year period.
Yes.
Yes, of what the country has been through. We looked at issues such as public debts, the land issue, which is less explored in terms of the arable land that's available for farming, and also land ownership issue. We had the issue of droughts. We had the issue of stunting.
Slow growth.
Yes. No, it's stunting in terms of food.
Okay.
Yeah, because according to the Kenya Demographic Housing Survey,
Yes.
we find out that 1 in 5 children are currently stunted.
Okay.
Meaning,
Health.
yes. So meaning there's an issue with food prices. Meaning not so many people can afford a meal a day or something of the sort. Or maybe the quality of food that they can afford is not good for their nutrition. So by insisting on raising revenue,
Yes.
how is it affecting these people who can't already afford a meal a day?
Yeah.
Yes. So then we had the program framing priorities, whereby we looked at all these conditions that the IMF has laid out. Currently, we have 36. We call it the Christmas tree conditionality in the paper.
Mhm.
You have 36 conditions that have been laid for Kenya, which Kenya has
36
to.
conditions
Yes.
that the government has to meet
Yes.
before IMF can release its funding.
No, during the 38th month program,
Yeah.
it has to meet milestones.
Okay.
That's they have reviews in different frequencies.
Okay.
They produce reports on what has been achieved, what has not been achieved.
Okay.
From these 36 conditionalities.
Conditions. Yes.
Yes, and we call them the Christmas tree conditionalities, and some of them are not necessary. Like, for instance, the CBAMs,
Okay.
because looking at the emissions, Kenya is not like a big contributor to the carbon emissions.
Okay.
But making it a priority instead of something like drought, something like food prices, is not an efficient use of time for the IMF.
Okay.
Yes. And then after that, we looked at it was our own assessment whereby we gave different recommendations, such as reducing the conditionalities, loosening the monetary policy, which is too tight at the moment.
What do you mean by it's too tight at the moment?
It's basically reducing the CBR rates, the central bank, the interest rates.
Okay.
Last month, the Monetary Policy Committee sat and reduced it by 25 basis points. That is, okay, I can't remember. Okay, before it was 300 basis points. So right now it's at 275 basis points. So,
and this affects interest rates charged by banks on loans that it can
yes,
give
it can give
investors and
businesses.
entrepreneurs,
Yes.
which then affects investment, which then affects tax and taxation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's a spiraling effect.
Yes.
So they try to keep the interest rates high so that they can attract foreign investments to keep the currency stable.
Okay.
But okay, we recommend that they just loosen the the monetary policy, and just let the shilling regulate itself, like
in the market.
Yes, in the market.
Okay.
And this will it will cause an outward growth orientation.
What do you mean by that?
By outward growth orientation, it's basically the export and import markets.
Yes.
Yes, trade that because the shilling if the shilling against the dollar is how do I put it? If the dollar is too high against the shilling,
Yes.
the exporters will be losing by exporting to the markets, to the global markets, while those people who are importing, the goods will be too high for them. Okay. So by letting the shilling to regulate itself, like sort of stabilize on itself, of course we advocate for free markets by letting the currency regulate itself. When it does that, it will be able to there'll be it's called balance of payment. There'll be a stability in the balance of payment, because people will be able to export and import.
So we can pay our debts much easily. We can buy our goods on the global market much easily because we have enough of the money.
Yes.
Right? Is that what you're saying?
If the currency flows in and out easily, it will be the government will be able to have like enough foreign currency to repay external debt.
Yeah.
And also internal debt if there's money circulation in the economy.
So what are the key lessons of your report, and why should these key lessons be important to me as an ordinary citizen as opposed to the government. I suppose government officers attended the launch, they got the report, they put it on the back shelf. Why is this report important to me? What are the key lessons? Because I am assuming it's actually an important report.
It is.
Yes.
I will say it's important in terms of understanding where Kenya has come from, all these structural problems, all the way from land, these shocks that hit us, and also when you're having conversations with.
Could I just stop you there and ask you a question? Is this why, for example, the government is saying that it's gonna tax freehold land? Could there be a correlation between IMF conditionalities and this attempt to tax freehold land? Because I know that some county governments are actually insisting that they are going to tax freehold land. There's a discussion such as that one in Kisumu County, where I come from, for example. Is there a correlation, for example,
between the
IMF conditionalities that you to try to raise as much tax as possible from as many sectors of the economy as possible, and that therefore land is very easy to tax? For example, it's freehold.
I'll put it this way. I'll say the government is trying to just look for all avenues to make sure tax is paid, revenue is collected to fund different public services as well as pay debts. But okay, it wasn't explicitly stated in the IMF report that land will also be
taxed.
Yeah, taxed.
Okay, then let's go back
that's
to.
just I'll say that's just their creative way of trying to look at avenues because they've already exhausted.
That's the government's creative ways of dealing with what some of the IMF's conditionalities.
Yes.
So then let's just go back to what are the major lessons. If you could just discuss like 5 from this report, which I guess every Kenyan should be able to read or should get it and read it.
Okay.
So what are the 5 major lessons, for example?
Can I refer to my notes? Okay. Okay, we gave different solutions, including the relaxation of the monetary policy, which the government is trying to follow through. So for the major lessons, it's just understanding, like trying to trace back for the 30 years what has been happening from the low growth, the land issue, droughts, all those issues, and trying to see what has really been the issue and whatever the programs that the government is trying to create, like this agreement, whatever this arrangement that the government had with the IMF, what is it about? Because if you get to read and understand what's going on, you're able to challenge issues such as the finance bill. You're able to challenge all these bills that they're trying to put across. Like, for instance, today there's a bill that's been posted. Okay, I don't know whether you've seen it, whereby they need sort of public participation.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're able to read these documents, you'll understand what the government is doing and how you can counter them when they need you for public participation, when they need you to submit maybe
memorandum.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I think that's it for the public, and we had some recommendations for the government on what they're supposed to do, and also for the IMF.
Okay. So why should I read the report if I'm just an ordinary citizen? Because I hadn't seen the report until I was preparing to come here. And this one, when I got it and read it, I thought that it should actually have been in the popular media. Now you are in the popular economics program, isn't it? Why should I read this report? If I'm a guy, the guardsman, the tea girl here, the whoever is running this program, whoever is doing the recording, why should we read this report?
Well, I'll say I'll give an example of the protest that we had in June. And of course, there are protests that are still culminating at the moment. I'll say this is a manifestation of long-standing problems that we've had on the policies that the government has been trying to implement, the monetary policy, the fiscal policy that the government has been trying to implement. I don't think the problem started with the IMF. These are problems that have been there for so many years. And by reading these reports, you're able to see what these problems are and how they've been sort of piling up in terms of these bad policies that the government has been implementing. The, the tightened monetary policy, you're able to understand. And I think in the political economy analysis space, we have different currency of bargaining.
This report is from the 90s, isn't it?
Yes.
Into the 2000s. So this is Gen Z, isn't it?
Yes.
So you're saying the Gen Z should read this report? Because one of the key things the Gen Z had issues with was tax and taxation. There are all sorts of taxes that directly affect them, including on content creation, the content that they post on social media, which gives them a little bit of. So just explain to me, as if you're talking to a Gen Z, why they should read the report. Because I understand what you're telling me from the political economy, and I understand why I should read this report. But now, assume I'm a Gen Z.
I was driving to a certain point using the political economy analysis, whereby we all have different currencies of bargaining. The government has its own, we have our own by holding them accountable, going to the streets. If you get to understand whatever we've explained in this report, perhaps it will. Some people got angry by reading the reports, trying to understand the situation that has been there and the situation right now. And by working around it, you get to understand, is it the fault of the IMF? Is it the fault of the government? Is it our fault? Yes.
So in terms of the practicalities of what the report would have for the government and for all of us, are you suggesting that it's just informative? You don't see it as educative?
I'll say both. It's educative and it's also informative in terms of it's educative by, okay, we have different charts here that show different trends. We also have investments, charts on investments, private and public investments, and also the currency. I'll say if you look at this, you're able to sort of read and interpret what's happening, not just locally, but also globally, because we've done also there's a peer comparison on growth between Kenya and its peers.
Okay.
And of course, okay, we did it. We had all factors constant, and we were just looking at GDP growth, maybe from the year 1990, where they were all at the same level. But because of different policies, of course, there's some who decided to implement good policies. Then there's Kenya, then there's others. So, of course, it took different routes.
Okay. I hope that there'll be a popular version of the reports. As we end the program, I just want you to say the last word on the whole question of economic policy, taxation, and development in the country of progress. Just the last word.
I'll say this is a very interesting report. It's on our website, the IEA Kenya website. Please go and read the reports. And yeah, there's so much more than what we've discussed here.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Maureen.
Thank
We
you.
hope to host you again
Thank you.
next and the next show. Thank you.
Thank you.